recording, and now we will start. So we learned about all kinds of sacrifices. Now we're going to learn about sins, a bunch of different sins that a person does. I guess it's somewhat going to be relevant actually today to the sacrifices that are brought, right? Like damaging holiness. You know, it's not exactly like it, but similarly, imagine someone damages a shul or stealing money. We'll learn about that today. Some practical, relevant stuff to the class. So just to recap, we learned about the burnt offering, which is brought for bad thoughts or not living up to your potential, not doing a positive mitzvah that you needed to do. Then we learned about the shlomim, the peace offering, which is about no sin done. It's just simply to bring like a gift, thanksgiving offering to Hashem, and not specifically thanksgiving, but just, you want to bring a gift to God. And then we spoke about the next thing was the sin offering. And of course, we started with the sins of who? We started with the sins of the rabbis, the Kohen Gadol, and the head chief court. So that was all yesterday. Beautiful way to start learning about the sins. And today, we're going to learn about the average Joe sins. So join me, my friends, as we learn about the sin offerings. And there's one or two really beautiful Rashis. I think we're going to actually study those Rashis today inside the beautiful message. Almost like you could look at it like an optimist or a pessimist. Everything in life, you really could find it in two ways. So hopefully with Hashem's help, we'll get to that. But here we go. Let's talk about the average Jew's sin. If they does something wrong. And by the way, it's the greatest gift. Hashem literally gives you a way to reconnect with God. Even though the damage was done, the relationship was hurt, Hashem is giving us a way, telling Moshe Rabbeinu, here is the way, and there's like a recipe book, and if you did this and this and that, we're going to go through it today. And what happens if you can't afford it? What happens if you don't have a lot of money? Is there any way? There's a joke someone repeated once from Rabbi Gordon. He said, this guy says, I think it was, let's say, fast. I think that's where it was in Tanya. Tanya says that today we don't have these sacrifices, so what do? You fast. So he said, but what happens if a person can't fast so much? If you need so many fasts for every sin, what are you supposed to do? So he says you could give tzedakah instead of those charity that equals the food. So every meal, let's say $10 is your average meal. So you pay $10 for every sin that you do. But what if he's a poor guy and he can't afford so many meals for all the sins? So what does he do? He can't afford it. So the answer is, so tell him not to sin. Some people can't afford to sin, basically. If it costs too much, if you can't afford to deal with the cost of the sin, then the lesson obviously is just don't sin. That you have no option of sinning. I'm in the middle of a class with 12 people on.
So the flip side is if you can afford it, as much as you want.
Sorry, what'd you say, Alan?
If you can afford it, you can sin as much as you want.
No, we're not saying that either.
I think the Tanya also says that if you sin on purpose in order to be knowing you could be forgiven for it, it's a lot harder to be forgiven for it. If you know you're doing it only so you could like pay it off or be forgiven for it.
Right. So if you're relying on the card, the tshuva card, it's harder to do tshuva. Right. So you can't say I'm going to do this because I know I have a way out. No.
That doesn't work. Everybody doesn't go and say on Yom Kippur.
We're going to talk about Yom Kippur today, actually. By the way, it's going to come up, the power of Yom Kippur in the Rashi, long Rashi we're going to learn today. Okay, let's go. Very good. Awesome. So just don't sin. It's not worth it. It costs too much, and it's too much aggravation. Just not worth it. Just don't sin. Just cut it out. That's it. Just not worth it. Okay, verse 27. Vim nefesh achas techta b'shkaga. And if somebody sins, not like we learned yesterday, not the head priest, and not the rabbinical court, and not the leader, none of those guys. A regular Jew, somebody sinned b'shkaga by mistake. We're talking about by accident. If you did a deliberate, that it actually doesn't work. It's great to have a sacrifice forgive you. You can't like do a sin, or not all. We're going to see today actually some sins you can. But if you did it on purpose, the sacrifice doesn't work. But if you did it by mistake, you still did, the damage is done. So the sacrifice is what cleans up that sin. If it was a mistaken sin. And remember, we're not talking about the regular sins. There's 365 things a Jew is not allowed to do. We're talking about the small list of those 365 that you would get covers for, that you would get cut off from heaven, which means a person would die if they did a severe sin. I believe like one of them is Yom Kippur, eating on Yom Kippur, then their soul would be cut off and they would die young. In that case, if it was done by mistake, that kind of very serious crime between you and Hashem, and you did it by mistake, then you bring a sacrifice, and that sacrifice takes it away. So let's go inside. So if somebody sins, miyama aretz from the yama aretz, from the regular guy, from the land, the regular people, not the kohen gadol, not the priest, regular guy. Now, from any of the mitzvahs that a Jew is not allowed to do from the list that I just mentioned, but Ashem, and he's guilty, incurred guilt. He did a very heinous crime, and he's now carrying that guilt, even though it was my mistake. But we were talking the other day. I was sharing with you the story how, unfortunately, my cousin was killed in a car accident. Imagine the guy who killed him, even if it was by mistake, right? Imagine the trauma that guy has to live through for the rest of his life, knowing he killed a person. So even when a heinous crime is done, even if it's by mistake, it's still a very serious crime. We're talking about the most serious prohibitions of the most serious of the 3 to 65 things you're not allowed to do, the very serious ones. Verse 28, and then he realizes he does his sin. Now he's guilty for the sin that he did, and he knows. He finds out afterwards, I made a major mistake. Shoots, I made a major mistake. I did this thing. I thought it was okay. I didn't realize at the time. People make mistakes in life. People make serious mistakes in life. So what do you do? Ashachata that he did, behavi karbanoi, and he brings a sacrifice to forgive. This regular Jew also brings a sacrifice to reconnect with Hashem, to make up for the grave sin that was done, although it was done by mistake. What is it? It's a siras izim. He brings a goat. Yesterday we were learning in the first two, the kohen gadol and the rabbinical court has to bring an ox, a bull, an ox, whatever you call it. But today, a regular guy sins, it could be a goat. I don't know how much goats cost, whatever. I believe I saw somewhere that the goat is 2 years old. We're going to see in a moment, actually, what kind of goat is the price tag on this goat. So to me, it has to be a complete goat, which means don't bring God your shmatas, your beat up worst goat. Don't go to the store and tell the store, I give me the most beat up thing, I have to give it to God. No, bring God a perfectly, not a blemished goat. The keva, it should be a female. I spoke about a few days ago why it's specifically a female goat that's being brought. It's not even for males, but when you go to the store to buy your goat, to ask forgiveness, it has to be a female, it has to be complete, it has to be a female. For the sin that you sinned, so you did a sin, you're going to go and bring a goat. What happens? So the first thing is with all the sacrifices, so place his hands on the head of the sin offering, designate it, and he'll slaughter it in the same place which we slaughtered the first burnt offering sacrifice that we learned about. I believe it's in the north. He'll slaughter it in the same place. It's the same area, I believe you learned, where in your heart, where the evil inclination of the person, that area which kind of is the area on the building in the courtyard where it would be, that's where you should slaughter it. It's asking forgiveness for the evil inclination we have. And then the Goyen, remember, as soon as it's slaughtered, takes his cup, collects the blood that squirts out of the neck, goes right into the cup. That's why he sticks his finger in. So unlike the other sacrifices, the sin offering will always have a finger dipping inside of it. Blood is, right? Blood represents the soul, and this animal is going to be killed instead of you, so it's to forgive for your soul. So the blood is very significant. You're going to sprinkle the blood on the altar. By the way, if you remember, the altar was made out of from earth, from the whole world, to ask forgiveness for the person. They designate this is the place where a person will be given forgiveness. So you sprinkle the blood of this animal you brought on the altar, but you do it with your finger. The other two sacrifices, the burnt offering and the shlamim we learned about, you just could sprinkle right from the cup. The kohen gadol has got to stick his finger. The kohen has to stick his finger in the blood, and he puts it on the corners of the altar, not on the walls like we've learned, I guess. Here it's on the corners. Remember these horns. On the horn, they have these 4 horns protruding out of them. Sprinkles the blood on the horns of the altar, on the outer altar, not the inner altar. When the kohen gadol sins, it's very severe. You bring it inside the mishkan and the tabernacle, and you bring it on the inner altar that's inside the tabernacle. This is in the courtyard on the outer altar. And obviously, once you sprinkle the blood, there's a lot of blood still remaining in that cup, in the first collection of blood that came out of the animal's neck. So you're going to take that, and in the base, we learned about this in the past when we were learning about the makeup of the temple. There was a hole in the base of the altar, which you pour the blood in there, and it would go very deep down into the earth. So the rest of that blood gets poured down in the base of the altar into the ground. That's called chelba. And what do you now do with it? Now you have the whole animal. What do you do with the rest of this? What was it? A ram? What do we say? A ram or a goat? A goat. What do you do with the rest of the goat? So again, there's all the pieces that we remove. We talked about the kidneys, that's what causes a person to sin. We talk about the fats, that's the fats of the person. So you take kol chelba, you take off all the sections of the meat, the steak, whatever, you take up, not the steak. You take the feet, it's kol chelba, all the fats, yasir, kashar, husar, chelav, me'alzeva, chashlam, the same fats that you took off from the Shlomim, the peace offering sacrifice. Remember, we went through a specific fats that you have to take off. Remember, it was the fats that was on top of the flanken, the fats that was on the kidneys, the fats that's on the innards, all those sections of fats, the chelav, it's called in Hebrew, you take out. The kohen will go and burn those sections of fats on the altar. It'll be a good smelling offering to Hashem. We learned that means that in Hashem's name, you're doing it in Hashem's now reconnecting with God in pleasure because you're doing what Hashem wants. You're giving your animal away. You're going to be back human. You're not going to act animal instinct anymore. The kohen will cause forgiveness for you, and you will be forgiven. So all the sections, like we discussed earlier, which we're not discussing now, go on the altar. Now you could bring a goat, but guess what? You could also go to the store and you could order a sheep. It doesn't have to be a goat. It could also be a sheep. Or if you remember from our previous class, that a sheep, you have to just give a little bit more on the altar. What's the most choicest, delicious, best shtickle piece of meat in the sheep? That's the tail. The tail has a good meat, fatty tail. So if you want to choose a sheep, everything's the same. You got to bring the kidneys, you got to bring the liver, pieces of the liver. This guy, you got to bring also the tail, the whole back section of the tail, that fatty piece of meat. You also burn on the altar for Hashem. If it's a sheep, karbanai, not a goat, you want to bring a sheep, lachatas nekev, but it's got to be female. Sin offering always got to be female. Tmima, completely when you should bring it to Hashem again. No blemish. Don't come in and ask for the beat up, cheapest sheep. When you go for your car, you should go to the store and say, I want the cheapest car that's out there. At least that's what I do. But when you go for the sheep, to gift Hashem, then you ask for the best thing. Verse 33, and you should put your hands, again, always designating the animal, put your hands on the animal's head. You should slaughter it, lachatos, as a sin offering. It has to be slaughtered for the right reason. In other words, you can't mess around. The intent is very important here. When you're slaughtering the animals, no monkey business. You have to be very serious, sincere, place your hands on the animal and say, Hashem, and think in your head, this is my intent, that this is, instead of me, I sinned and I blemished a very severe sin. I did a sin that if I did it on purpose, I would be cut off from Hashem. God, I'm asking you, please, this animal is going to be a sin offering. It's going to reconnect me with you, Hashem. Although this heinous crime was done, we're going to reconnect Hashem. Where should you shecht it? You should shecht it together where you slaughtered the burnt offering before. In the north, again, representing, if I remember correctly, it's the north, and that represents, we said, where the animalistic tendencies are in the body. So our animal got the better of us, even though it was a mistake. But you know what? Like, I'm just thinking about a mistake. There's two kinds of mistakes in life, There's like a mistake that's totally not your fault. And then there's a mistake. Like, God forbid, if someone kills another person in a car accident because they were negligent, because they were texting, it's that kind of, you know what I mean? Not all mistakes. Some mistakes are you are a little responsible, even though it was a mistake. So you should have been more careful, God forbid. Now, just thinking about this, because of the car accident, somebody killed someone's life, you looked at your phone for a second. You have to be very careful with these things. It's a very severe crime. So it still needs forgiveness. It was an accident, but you still need forgiveness for it. Verse 34. And the same thing, the kohen's got to take the blood, that's boy, specifically with his finger. And where does he sprinkle the sin offering blood? Not on the walls, on the corners, on the top corners of the altar. It's called the and all the leftover blood after you sprinkled it out. Pour in the base of the animal. It's called chelba, all the fats. You should, again, the fats is what we're burning. Kasher, yusar chelav akeves, kesev, just like you burn the fats of the sheep in the offering, in the shlamim offering, that includes the tail. The kohen will sacrifice it on the fire. The kohen will gain forgiveness for you. Look how amazing the kohen is. He's taking care of his people. On the sin that he sinned, and the person will be forgiven. That's it. So you did a very heinous crime, and it was by mistake, but there's a remedy. Hashem's telling you the kohen has a way for a person who violated any one of the 365 sins that are heinous, real serious crimes, that if they did it on purpose, they would actually be cut off from Hashem. We got a solution. You bring the sacrifice, the kohen hooks you up, Yehuda hooks us up, he goes into the temple, and he brings a couple of sacrifice. You bring your sacrifice to the door, he does a little bit of slaughtering, you burn certain pieces on the temple, and Baruch Hashem, with Hashem's help, your relationship with Hashem is back and stronger than ever before. Okay, but now, what about other sins? Let's talk about other sins that a person does. I feel like, I don't know why. I didn't realize this came already. Where am I holding over here? Hold on. Yeah, no, this is right. Okay, Friday's Chumash. Good. Well, it's not so simple. So there's other sins that a person could do. And here's another sin that he gets into now. The sin he wants to talk about now is, maybe a sin that we do deal with more today, which specifically there's a variety of sins and the kind of sacrifices will change. And he's going on, what about if a guy was false witness? He lied, he made an oath. And it wasn't just any lie. It's interesting, it lied about a testimony. So the guy saw a crime happen. Very often people run away. They don't want to get involved. They run away. The problem is, how are you going to catch the culprit? Now, it's very serious crime because if there's witnesses that are lying, is obviously a very serious crime. But even if you have witnesses and you say, look, testify for me, I need you to testify that this guy killed somebody or this guy did something, stole money even, and the guy says, I don't know anything about it. So you can actually subpoena the guy to court, right? And the guy can say, I swear I wasn't there, I didn't see it. And that's a serious crime because how could you have a system when nobody wants to testify? So that's an interesting sin that the person did. Let's see inside. Verse 1. Chapter 5, verse 1. V'nefesh ki sechta, a soul that's in Shama kol Allah, and he accepts an oath. Come to court. The witness came to court. And they said, do you testify? Did you see this happen? Swear to us that you didn't see this, that you're not testimony to this case to help out in this thing. Who aid? And he says, I swear. He agrees, yes, I swear. I didn't see that, I wasn't there. And he did. He was witness. He saw the story go down. Or he saw a yad, or he know in lo yagid. If he doesn't, it's an interesting sin that the Torah is addressing now. If he doesn't say, but the problem is he swore falsely. So now he's saying, I swear I didn't see it. So swear to us that you didn't see it. So swear that I didn't see it. And he lied. It's an interesting sin. So he's swearing. It's a very heinous crime. Again, swearing falsely in God's name. Right? And here the court's making you swear that you didn't, when you come to court, you say you swear, everything I say is true, whatever. And here the guy lied. He lied about not knowing a testimony, a witness to something. Or another kind of a sin. In these days, it's not so relevant. It's a little relevant today because going onto the Temple Mount today would probably violate this prohibition. Why I'm saying it's not so relevant today, because we don't have as much holiness like we had in the times of Beis Hamikdash that we can violate it. But it's going to basically talk about if somebody is impure and they access and they touch and they're involved with pure things, they're violating the purity of it, and it's also a very serious crime. If somebody, now by the way, these are sins that are less heinous than the earlier topic. The earlier topic was that you violated on purpose, you'd be subject to excommunication, being cut off from Hashem. These ones, actually, maybe some of them you would. I'm sorry, some of these you actually would. But anyway, for some reason, it's selecting these specific sins here. Somebody touched something tummy. He went and he touched something that's impure. Touch something impure. How do you become impure? No problem. It's actually just an interesting law. An animal that got killed, like roadkill, but it wasn't slaughtered, which makes it very interesting because when you slaughter an animal, it's also killed. It's also dead. But it's interesting. If you slaughter it correctly according to Jewish law, it's still pure, as long as it was slaughtered according to Jewish law. But if the animal died by not a slaughtering kind of a death, then the animal's carcass becomes impure. So really, they're both dead animals, but it really depends how it was slaughtered. Slaughtered with a knife, according to Jewish law, kosher, it's not impure. And it's kosher, but it's also not impure. Slaughtered not by a knife, shot, like you go hunting, whatever, so when you touch that animal, the carcass becomes impure. But so what? It's not a problem actually to be impure. But the problem is, you will see in a moment. So you went hunting and you touched the dead animal, you touched the deer that got killed, the roadkill on the side on the street. Or an unclean animal, a carcass of either a wild animal or a tame animal, whatever, so on, you touch the dead carcass. Or it wasn't an animal, it was more like a creeping thing, like mice or whatever, so on. and you forgot that you were impure, no problem. You don't want to be impure. You want to be impure, fine, that's fine. As long as you're a kohen, you have the right to be impure. But what happens if you became impure and then V'utami v'ashem, and he was tamei, and he started eating sacrificial food? He brought a shlamim, and now he's eating from that shlamim sacrifice. Or God forbid, he went into the temple, and it's a severe. This is why you should not visit the Temple Mount today. This is the problem with Jews visiting the Temple Mount. It's not allowed according to halacha because it's a very serious crime. So he's tummy. Most of us have been to funerals. If we've been near dead bodies, we'll see in a second. If you go to a dead body, we're going to see. Right now, the verse is speaking about you became impure by touching a dead animal. You went hunting or you touched different kinds of carcasses of dead animals. Verse 3, or you touched the dead person. You went to a funeral, you carried the casket, or you were in the same room as where there was. Everyone here has been to a funeral. Even a kohen has been to a funeral because he's allowed to go to his parents' funeral, but now he's impure. Or by the way, there's other ways a person could become impure. How can a man, any ego or any kind of person, other ways a man could become impure? If a woman, first of all, by her period, even not during her period, if she sees blood, a uterus blood, she becomes impure even if it's not her period time. Or a male who has also certain kind of an emission becomes impure, and you're not allowed to go on the Temple Mount. This is the kind of sin we're talking about. That's why everybody had that situation. Therefore, they're not allowed to go on the Temple Mount. Let's talk about some more cases. And another interesting case. Rashi says this verse is talking about another interesting case. What happens if, a husband and wife, according to Jewish law, are not allowed to have relations when a woman's in her menstrual cycle? What happens if he did? The man had intimacy with his wife when she was in her menstrual cycle, then the man becomes impure. And guess what? If you touch that man, you also become impure. Talk about cooties in first grade. This is what's going on over here. But this is real halacha. So the man was with his wife in her menstrual cycle. Not just is she impure, he's impure. And then the guy went out with the beer with his friend, and the guy shook his hand, stopped him 5. Must have not been during Corona times. And even if you give him a fist pump, then the guy becomes impure now too. Now, and then he forgot that he touched the guy, or he didn't realize it was at a funeral, and he goes on to the Temple Mount. And it's a very severe crime. He forgot that he's impure, or he ate the sacrifice, and then he figures out, he's like, shoot, I touched the guy, and then I went for a tour on the Temple Mount, and I did a horrible violation. That's the greatest, holiest place in the world, and I went to being impure. So that's a crime. We're going to see about that. That's another sin. So far we have 2 sins we're discussing over here. Okay, I hope you guys are with me. Number 1 is you became impure. Well, the first case was, I'm sorry, you falsely lied about testimony. You didn't know. Case number 2, you became impure either from a dead carcass or many other ways, and then you went to the temple, went for a walk on the Temple Mount, being impure, but you forgot. You're making mistakes. The witness testimony, by the way, that wasn't a mistake. That was, remember, some of the crimes are intentional, but they're not as so. But they're not as severe. They're not as severe, but they're still intentional. So you lied that you don't know testimony, or you touched something that wasn't clean, and you went for a walk on the Temple Mount, or in the days of the Beis Hamikdash, you ate other holy foods. Another kind, or you lied, you just simply swore falsely. Lahara lahativ. You said, I swear I'm never going to eat sugar again, whatever it is. Or you swear you're going to for sure do this. You swore to your boss that you're going to have this done by that time, or you did something personal. You swore, I'm going on a diet and never again. And then, what happens? You forgot. We're not talking about someone deliberately lied. Or you swore it didn't happen a year ago. You're having a big fight with your friend or your spouse or somebody else. You swear that never happened. And you find that, oh my gosh, I lied. So now it's a terrible sin to swear falsely in Hashem's name. But it was a mistake. You really didn't know. But it's still a lie. You still swore falsely. That he went and he violated his sin, or he lied because he forgot what happened previously. Now, in this case, it depends how much money you have, what kind of sacrifice you bring. So here's where it's changing it up. There's options. In other words, what happens if you're a poor guy and you can't afford the sacrifice? Remember, we started off today's lesson, I guess, you had to bring a ram. But for these things we mentioned here, it depends how much money you have. Let's see what he says. Verse 5, the guy decides, I want to be a good Jew. I regret in my life that I did these things, or I made a mistake, or I regret what I did. I regret the mistakes that I've made. I want to make up. So what does he do? Okay, there's a makeup plan for you. Here's the makeup plan. You bring a guilt offering and Hashem offering to Hashem. The sin that you did. Again, it's got to be Nekeva. It's got to be a female. If it's from the flock, the smaller animals, either you could bring the kisva, or you could bring the sheep, or you could bring the goats. Always they go together often. The sheep and the goat are exchangeable. They're the same level sacrifice for sinning. The chatos as a sin offering, the chipra and the kohen will get forgiveness for you for those above 3 mentioned possibilities of sin. Either he swore falsely, or he went into the temple while he wasn't pure, or he swore falsely for testimony. Okay, there's a remedy, even though it's a serious crime, there's a remedy for that. Now we're going to say, but what happens? The guy swore falsely, but he wants to make up for now, but he doesn't have much money. He's a poor guy. You could do the same thing by the burnt offering we learned a few days ago. There's a secondary level for someone who's not as wealthy. He could bring two doves, either older doves or younger doves. Remember, they can't be middle, like teenage doves. Either be fully mature doves or young doves. You could bring 2 of them, Hashem, to God. Why 2? One will be brought as a sin offering, and one will be burnt as a burnt offering. I guess the burnt offering means it's completely burnt, and the sin offering is certain parts of it is burnt. We'll see. So you bring the 2 birds to the kohen, the guy who's has a little money but not much. He wants to get forgiveness for a sin. He can't afford a sheep or a goat, so he goes to the store for a much better price, a much cheaper price. He could buy 2 birds. First, you bring the sin offering, and then you bring the burnt offering. Why the sin offering first? That's the way you make up. The sin offering is always, I spoke about this before, that's considered the makeup for the crime. In other words, there's 2 parts when you hurt your friend. Number 1 is you first ask forgiveness. You apologize. I know what I did is wrong, and I apologize for it. Then you could buy him a second gift that's like, okay, let's go out to eat. Let's go out for a beer or something else. So it's a 2-step process. You can't go first, let's go out for a beer, and then ask him forgiveness. No. You first ask forgiveness. So there's 2 sacrifices there. First, you bring the sin offering, and then you bring the gift, and then you buy him a gift because you really want to get, because even though he forgave you, still your relationship's not what it should be. So you bring that second gift. Now, how is the bird brought in a very interesting way? We learned about this the other day. Instead of using a knife for this, the kohen has these sharp nails on his thumb, and he's able to very strongly, in some way that they teach the kohanim to do, to slaughter the bird with using his nail from the back of his head. It goes in. However, don't completely separate the head from the rest of the bird's animal. Only separate in slaughtering. Those who know the laws of slaughtering, there's 2 parts to the animal. It's called the esophagus and the windpipe, the food pipe and the windpipe, and you got to cut off at least one of those 2 things that connect the head to the rest of the body. One of those 2 have to be slaughtered. You don't do both. Anyway, that's just an interesting idea in the way this bird is slaughtered with the nail of the kohen. And unlike the earlier sacrifice, that we said with the bird, you just take the bird and you squeeze there's not a lot of blood, and the whole point is to get the blood on the altar, or one of the main points is. So that in the previously we learned you just squeeze the bird against the altar wall and the blood drips down the wall, and that's what forgives you. But here, no, it's a sin offering. So you got to also sprinkle the blood. So verse 9, you sprinkle, use the bird to sprinkle the blood on the wall, and what's left over of the blood in the bird, he squeezes out of the bird to the base of the altar. That is the way the sin offering is done. It has to be done for the right intent. Again, you have to have the right intent. I'm doing this for ask for forgiveness, sin offering, and that is how it works. What do you do with the second bird? You do it like the burnt offering, which is that the burnt offering is you don't have to sprinkle, you just squeeze it out against the altar wall. There's no sprinkling of blood, and then you throw the whole bird. We learned about that earlier. After the bird's dead, you rip part of the back of the bird and you throw the bird without the stomach. Remember, we learned we take out the stomach of the bird because the bird steals food from other people's property. We don't want stealing going on the altar, and you burn the rest of the bird on the altar. The kohen will get forgiveness from the sin of shachata that he sinned with nislach loy, and Hashem will forgive him for the sin that was done. Continuing right along to Shabbos' Chumash. But what happens if he's so poor? Can't afford to go to a sheep. Can't even afford 2 doves. Can a poor guy get forgiveness? Remember I said before, if you're too poor, don't sin. But what's this guy going to do? He sinned. He made a mistake. He forgot that if he's too poor, he shouldn't sin. What should he do? Verse 11. Unfortunately, he's such a destitute person, he can't even afford. Not 2 older doves and not 2 younger doves. What's the sin he's going to bring to ask forgiveness? He's going to bring flour, right? So we learned that there's a third option for a poor man. A sidus eifa, a tenth of an eifa. I believe we learned that was 2.5 liters of flour. Soyless of fine flour. Don't go get the cheap flour in the store. Go get the fine flour. Lachatos is a sin offering. And then here we're going to differ. No oils allowed on it. Remember the gift offering, Tashem, the burnt offering, bring it on, make it beautiful, put frankincense on it, put oil on it. This should look like a good, nice, beautiful offering. But this, no, because you acted like an animal. We're going to imply in your sacrifice, no beautiful stuff on it. No oil allowed on it. No frankincense. Don't bring me extra stuff here. You did something wrong. This is not the right gift. You wanted them to bring a burnt offering afterwards. Good, dress it up, make it nice, but not this one, kichatasu, because it is a sin offering. It should not look beautiful and nice. Don't make it fatted up with some beautiful olive oil. No, that's not allowed. Yes, and you bring the flour offering to the kohen. Come, it's a kohen mimeno. What does the kohen do? What he always does with the flour offering? He takes his 3 fingers, he scoops out a fistful, but between the 3 middle fingers. Malay comes a full fistful of the 3 fingers. As askarasa, this is the remembrance for you to Hashem. This is the way the poor man is going to be forgiven. You'll burn it on the altar. Alisha Hashem chatasu in the fire of Hashem. That is a sin offering. So again, I know it's flour, but you're going to intend, you're going to think about it. The kohen's going to remember you, and this is the way the poor man's going to be forgiven with the flour offering. The kohen will atone, bring forgiveness for the sin that he did. From any one of these sins, in any of these cases. He'll be forgiven, and it'll be for kohen as a meal offering. The kohen will eat the remnants, the remainders of it, because that's the way he's forgiven. The kohen will have a meal now, and by the kohen eating it, the man will be forgiven. Okay. Rashi brings here an interesting point in the verse. He gets a little technical on you here. He says, what happens if the guy got poor or got rich? So in other words, the guy was a very wealthy guy, and he's like, yo, bring it on. I'll bring my sheep or a goat in order to ask forgiveness. And then, unfortunately, boom, by time it came, I guess it might take time till he arranged travel arrangements, till he went to the temple, and for all you know, he's now a poor person. Can you swap out your sin offering now with you update your status? And does it work vice versa? If you're a poor man and you say, okay, well, I could afford the flour offering. By the time you get to the temple, you're now a millionaire. You win the lottery. Can he still say, look, I designated the flour offering? Does it go? And Rashi tells us, we learn from this verse that it changes. So basically, let's say you bought a goat for $300, and then it became very, very poor. For what? Should I stop the class to give you the code, middle of learning? No, I don't think that's a good idea. So he said, So he said he became a poor man. So he says, you know what? Sell out the $300-$400 goat, and for $50 or $20, you could go to the store and buy yourself a flour pack of flour, a fine flour, and use the percentage of the more expensive offering for this. And the same thing is vice versa. If you're a poor man and you had a flour offering and then you became very wealthy, and it's not coming of you to bring such a cheap offering to ask forgiveness, you could up your ante, sell it, you could use more money, and then buy a larger sacrifice. But you have to bring the sacrifice based on your current status, not on your previous status. Very interesting. Now, it does not have, Rashi wants to make it clear from the verse, it doesn't have to do with how severe, how heinous your crime was, how severe your sin was, okay? That's not what's going to decide if you bring a flour offering or a bird offering or an animal. That has nothing to do with it. That's not part of it. It is based on your financial status. That is the deciding factor. If you will bring a bird, a an animal or a flour offering. That is what we go by. So I think it's called the oil of a yored, which means the guy will ask you, okay, what's a sacrifice? It depends. Depends on what? Doesn't depend on the sin. It depends on how wealthy you are. You got to pay up based on your wealth and your status of wealth. On this, you might say the argument, if you're more wealthy, don't sin, because it's going to cost you a lot more than it's going to cost the poor guy, because you're going to have to bring goats or sheep. At that level, if you're in the average guy or the lower guy, you got to bring birds, doves, and if not, you got to bring the small sacrifice that you have. Okay. And now, one more interesting fact. So we keep on saying the Kohanim are really part of this system. Why? How are the Kohanim part of the system? Because the Kohanim eat the animal. And by them eating your animal, they learn Torah, they bring forgiveness to you. So you're bringing Hashem something, and the leftover meal offering, the Kohanim eat it. But what happens if the Kohen sins? Who eats the sacrifice then? So I get it. If the Israelite sins, he goes to the temple, he says, look, I was a bad person, I was a bad boy, here's my sacrifice, burn on part of it to Hashem, and let Hashem eat the rest of the flour offering. Let the Kohanim eat it, they'll learn Torah, and I'll be forgiven. But what happens if it was the Kohen that sinned? So he says, very interesting, that if the Kohen brings the sacrifice, nobody eats it. It gets completely burnt on the altar. Only when does the Kohen eat it? When he's not the one who sinned. If it was another guy that sinned, then him eating it helps the other guy gain forgiveness. But if you're the one who sinned, whether it's an animal or a meal offering, it doesn't matter. That sin offering has to be completely given to God, and that will forgive the Kohen for doing the sin. Okay, that is a korban chatos. Now we're going to learn about a korban asham. We'll go into a little bit more detail. It's another kind of sin offering. Within the sin offering alone, there's two categories, depending on the sin. Sometimes you bring this, sometimes you bring that. It's very similar, but they're just prescribed for different sins that you do. I saw it one time. I want to find it. What's the remedy? Why this for that? But not right now. At least we're going to go on. This is called the asham, I think. Nefesh kisimamo. I'll just share it to make this practical. You know, sometimes it's not really our current day shuls, but it could be in the Beis HaMikdash. Imagine sometimes kids are playing in the shul and the shul gets damaged, right? In a Chabad house. Rabbi Chazanav now has a video camera, so he checks out who exactly was the one who broke the door to the bathroom. We had a story once, or who broke the hoop. Unfortunately, sometimes I know when I was doing high holiday services, the kids went into because we rent a public school, and they ruined a couple of stuff in the teacher's classroom, and the teacher was very unhappy with the kids. Unfortunately, sometimes it happens that the parents don't want to take responsibility, and they make excuses, whatever, or so on, and the shul's left to cover the damage that was done there, and it falls in the community. But that's not the right way it should happen. The person should take responsibility for their damage that they've done, especially if it's a shul. It's even more of a reason it should be. But we're not talking about the shul. We're talking about Hashem's things, even greater than the shul, Hashem's holy sacrifice. So what happens? And that's the next sin that we're approaching. It's again, it's you damaged Hashem's holy things. Let's see, verse 15. If a soul does a violation, commits a betrayal, and what's the betrayal that the person commits? He misappropriates holiness. The chata b'shgaga, and he sinned by mistake. It was a mistake that the person did this violation. Mikache Hashem, from Hashem's holy things, sacred things, think like a sacrifice. You went and you violated. This belonged to God. It didn't belong to you. It belonged to Hashem, and you went and misappropriated. You violated. Okay, so you've taken something holy, which is a higher degree. Which was a higher degree of holiness, and you taken something and you went, you sold it, you gave it away, you did a serious violation to it. So you can bring a guilt offering, a sin offering. These offerings are going to be for violation of sanctity. Okay, the earlier chatos sin offering was for, we spoke about violations of falsely swearing or making something impure. This is which you misappropriated holy items. So what do you bring ayil for this? You don't bring a goat or a sheep or a dove or depending on your financial status, you bring a shame ayil. You bring a ram, tamim. Again, it can't be a beat up ram. It has to be a complete nice ram. Minatzoin be'akachav. You bring that from the flock. Again, the other guy brought a sheep or a goat. Here he's telling you bring a ram. Be'akachav. How much does the ram have to cost? Kesef shkalim b'shekel hakodesh la'asham. It has to be a value of silver shekels. I believe Rashi says it's 2 silver shekels, 2 sloim which is a value. I didn't look it up before. How much is a sela exactly? But 2 silver shekels. That, in other words, is telling you what kind of ram does it have to be. One that has a value of 2 silver shekels. And that's how you're going to ask Hashem forgiveness for taking his sacrifice that belonged to God and then going and selling it or using it, whatever, and so on, for the violation that took place, violating something that belonged to God. Not even talking about just paying it back, I guess, just for the fact of violating something that belongs to God, you bring a sacrifice in order to ask forgiveness for that violation. That's verse 16. So of course, you're going to go and pay back whatever damage you did, whatever you sold the item or whatever, so on, you went and did business with Hashem's thing, you went and did business with it, you're going to pay it, but you're also going to pay a fine. What's the fine? You're going to pay back a fifth of what you stole. You're going to give a little bit extra now. Now you're going to give back what you stole, and also you're going to give a little bit extra. And also, it's the kohen. Who do you give it to? You go to the kohen, you give him. The kohen will ask forgiveness for you. With the ram of this guilt sin offering, you'll be forgiven. Some will forgive you. Okay, you did something wrong. You went, you paid back, and you even added a fifth, and you brought a sacrifice. I'm sorry, Hashem, for violating holy stuff, which obviously has to be taken with much greater seriousness than just something that's not holy. Okay, that's one. What happens? He gets into an interesting case now. All the cases we spoke so far is talking about a case, and this is going to be a long, interesting Rashi. Let's just discuss this case. It's an interesting case a little bit, and we're going to get into the Rashi. So, everything we said so far, you found out at the end of the day that you sinned. It was a mistake most of the cases, but you sinned. You know for sure you sinned. What happens if you don't know that you sinned? You know you might have sinned. How could you have such a case? So Rashi brings, we keep on telling you about fats. You're not allowed to eat the fats in the animal. So he says it depends where the fats is. It's really not a whole part. It can either be called chelev or it could be called shuman, which means if it's the fats that's on the kidneys, that's on the innards, that's on top of the flanken, that's not allowed to. Serious crime, right? You could even be cut off from heaven for eating that fat. But if you eat the fats that's somewhere else, no problem. Enjoy your steak with the fats, totally kosher. It's fine. It's on the prime rib steak that you're getting. You have a little fats there. Knock yourself out. Eat the lamb chops with the fats, totally kosher, no problem. As long as it's not from the tail. I see Alan shaking his head. Alan, you like lamb chops? Me too. Very good. We share taste buds of it. But if you so the fats, knock yourself out. Enjoy the fats. But what happens if you know you ate the fats? You might have to bring one of the earlier sacrifices. But what happens if you saw 2 pieces of fats there? 2 pieces of fats in front of you. You thought they're both kosher, ate one, no problem. But then someone comes and tells you, Mister, one of them was not kosher. Okay, but I only ate one of them. But I don't know. How could you tell the difference between kosher fats and non-kosher fats? Who could tell the difference between the 2 fats? They look exactly the same. The butcher never told you, or the butcher gave you the 2 pieces of the meat, and it's like he runs over to you later on. Either he says, "Oh my gosh, the meat I gave you that you ate, it was not kosher," but the butcher says, "No, I don't know. I mixed it up, and I don't know which one's which." Now you got a problem. In a way, you got a bigger problem because you don't know if you sinned or didn't sin. Now, can you bring a sacrifice if you don't know if you sinned? You can't bring a sacrifice unless you sin, not a sin offering. So there's a special offering for if you don't know if you sin. So that's what we're going to talk about now. There's that's the verse 17. If a guy sinned, did one of the violations that were equal to the 365 prohibitions, but one that you would get cut off from heaven. It was a serious one, but the problem is, you don't know if you actually did it or not. You're in the 50-50 chance, or you're suspect that maybe you sinned. You did guilty, and you're carrying the sin. I could be walking around with a sin that would, if I did it on purpose, I'd be guilty of being cut off from Hashem, but I don't know if I did that sin or not. I'm in a big land. I'm in big trouble. So what do I do? So he's going to tell you, we have a special sacrifice for you. Now, if at the end of the day, after you bring the sacrifice, you find out that you for sure did sin, no, it doesn't count for you. The maybe sacrifice doesn't count for you. The maybe sacrifice does not count for you. You then got to bring a for sure sacrifice, so you know you for sure sinned. But this only moves away that sin that maybe you ended up sinning. You see. So what does Rabbi Yossi say? So if you guys are thinking, oh my gosh, I got to bring a sacrifice for maybe I did a sin. So here's what Rabbi Yossi says. Here comes the long Rashi. We'll end this Rashi together. So Rabbi Yossi Haglili, there's two Rabbi Yossis here, I believe. One is Rabbi Yossi the Gilalite from the Galil, from the Gilalite. He says, wow, if Torah's holding you a punishment for a guy that doesn't know he sinned, that he has to bring a sacrifice, imagine the guy that does know that he sinned. Whoa, this is huge. This is a big verse here that's telling us that if you have to bring a sacrifice for a maybe violating a sin, now we see how severe, really knowing for sure that you did sin. Wow, that shows you the severity of sinning, because if I got to bring a sacrifice for not knowing that I sinned, I can only imagine what it's like to know that I sinned. So it shows you the severity of it. And the other Rabbi Yossi says, nah, kidding. Let's look at it positive. I mean, that you're looking at it in the negative sense, how severe it is. Says, man, if Hashem, for doing something wrong, is so strict, I can only imagine how much credit and a gift Hashem gives us for the people that do Hashem's will. Because we know that Hashem, as right hand of good, is a much greater, much more than doing bad. So by seeing the negative, Rabbi Yossi says, by seeing all the negative, that the severity of the crime, I could only imagine the beauty of the positivity of doing a mitzvah. That's what he flips it. He says, don't see, Rabbi Yossi says, see how severe a crime is, see how heinous a crime is, that if you maybe did a sin, it's so, you have to be so careful that if you maybe did a sin, make sure to bring a sacrifice for the sin. And he says, what? Rabbi Yossi, the other Rabbi Yossi says, no, not the Gilalite Rabbi Yossi. The other Rabbi Yossi says, what are you talking about? Look at it exactly the opposite, right? I guess this is like, to me, God forbid, I can't say about these rabbis that one's a pessimist or an optimist, but it sounds to me like a person today, like a person looking at something can literally come up with two opposite messages. You could say, wow, look how strict God is with people. Look how severe a crime it is that we have to be so careful not to sin. The other guy looks at, oh my gosh, I can't imagine how much credit I'm getting if this is how God treats people, or this is this not how God treats people. This is the severity of a crime. Imagine how much goodness and reward we get. And he says like this, he says, we could see this by Adam. I'm going to go through the Rashi here. Look at Adam. Adam was given one mitzvah. Do not eat from the tree of knowledge, right? And he ate from the tree of knowledge. He literally brought death to the whole world. No one was supposed to die. The human beings the biology would be different. People would live forever. Because of him, he died, and everyone else died. The whole world is going to end up dying, unless Mashiach comes very soon, and then we'll go back to that state. But throughout all of human history, how many people are dying, and people die because brought death to the world and so on. So he says, what for one sin? And we know, and we believe as Jews, we believe that Hashem's goodness is much, much greater than the badness. Than Hashem wants to do good much more than he wants to punish, or that we need to be punished for our actions. So we believe that goodness is greater. So we can see from here, if death to the whole world was brought by one severe crime, for sure, one mitzvah we do. And what are the mitzvahs Rashi mentions over here? That when you bring a sacrifice, you have to have the right intention to eat it, because you're only allowed to eat it within a certain amount of time, a day or 2 days, whatever it is. And if someone leaves it over, and it's a very serious crime. But what about the guy who does the mitzvah? In other words, he doesn't leave it over, and he doesn't think bad thoughts that he's going to leave it over. Or someone who fasts on Yom Kippur even gives. Could you only imagine if for one negative action so much death is brought to the world? Imagine one mitzvah, how much merit he brings for himself and for all his future generations. This is a different way of looking at things, positive or negative. Rabbi Kiva adds, he says another, I'm just going to share this Rashi. It's interesting. It's a little deep, but again, it seems to be going off topic a little bit. Of course, Rashi knew that this is needed over here. I guess maybe talking between all these sins and everything else and sacrifice. Rashi saying an interesting idea. It says there's a rule that when two witnesses come, remember we were talking today about two witnesses lying, but that they don't know testimony. What happens? Rashi brings a case where two witnesses from Rabbi Kiva, the two witnesses come and they lie. They make up a story. They say this guy owes $1,000 to the other guy. And they made up, the guy hired witnesses, fake news. So what's the punishment? The witnesses get whatever, and they're caught to be lying. The witnesses have to do whatever they tried to do to the other person. So they tried to cheat somebody out of $1,000. Now they got to pay up to the guy they tried to cheat the $1,000. They tried to kill someone. They themselves will get killed. So that's serious. We're going to keep the witnesses from lying. We're going to basically tell you, we'll do to you what you're trying to lie. If we catch you lying, we're going to do to you what you tried to do to somebody else. Now, every rule is based on 2 witnesses. So what happens if 3 witnesses come? And the guy hired 3 witnesses to lie. So the first 2 guys lie, and we know in Jewish law that the first 2, the testimony is accepted based on 2 witnesses. Then a 3rd guy comes. If you have to go, you have to go. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm just we're a few more minutes, we're a little bit more, and we're going to finish. What happens if 2 guys come and 2 guys lie, and then a 3rd guy comes and he lies too? Now the 3rd guy will say, look, don't punish me the way you're punishing the first 2 guys, because that wasn't necessary here. The guy would have anyway, the court would have trusted those 2 witnesses. Here you have me as a 3rd witness. So I'm not the one who was making the guy pay falsely, because the first 2 guys already made the guy pay falsely. And Rabbi Kiva says the law is that the 3rd guy still, it doesn't matter. You were with a group of bad people, and therefore you lied, so you also have to be part of the one repaying, or whatever damage you tried to cause. You have to be part of the team that's repaying it now because you were with them. You can't blame and say, oh, they were already doing it. You didn't need me. You still have to pay up. So he says here, if Rabbi Kiva says, if for negativity, we're going to say a guy who joins a bad people is going to be punished together with the bad people. The same thing is for a mitzvah. Guy gets caught up with a bunch of people doing a mitzvah, he will get the same credit as the person doing a mitzvah. And he gives I want to just finish with the Rashi. He brings a very interesting example from Elazar ben Azariah. Rashi really is bringing a bunch of cases here to show you that Hashem's good is better than the bad. So we already had 2. Number 1, we said if by Adam and Eve, Adam sinned, it caused so much damage, you could only imagine when you do a mitzvah. Think about it in the positive sense, how much good there is in the world. Then we said another case of if the 3rd witness gets caught up with the 2 witnesses for punishment, for sure the reward. Someone who does a mitzvah gets caught up with the other people doing a mitzvah and gets credit for it too. Now he's going to bring a very interesting case. So the case is that, do you get a mitzvah for something you didn't mean to do, right? Here's the case. So he says there's a rule in Jewish law that there's certain parts of our field when we're in Israel and we want to collect our field, we need to leave over for the poor. So you have to leave the corners of your field. Another thing is shikha, you forgot. You forgot certain, when you were collecting bundles, you forgot some of the wheat, some of the stuff fell down, you left it behind, and you're not allowed to come back and pick it up. You have to leave it for the poor. But it was unintentional. I didn't mean to leave it, too bad. Once you forgot it, it has to go for the poor. So he says, what does he learn from there? The guy is walking down the street and he loses a quarter. A poor man loses a dollar. $1 falls out of his pocket. Might not even be happy about it. He doesn't even know he lost it, maybe. And then a poor man comes, finds $1, and is starving. He goes to the local kosher store, and he buys himself something to eat, and he survives. You know that the guy who lost $1 gets the credit as if he did it? It's a fascinating thing. So he's trying to show you, I know we're talking about all the negative element of it, right, which was the case that we spoke about today, that you got to bring a sacrifice for doing a sin which you don't even know you did. But Rabbi Kiva is telling you, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah is telling you, it works on the flip side. You get credit for a mitzvah you did, even if you didn't know that you did the mitzvah. So $1 fell out of your pocket, and a poor person found it. Hashem credits you like you gave tzedakah to the person. That's a very beautiful. Next time you lose a couple bucks, don't get so upset. Hashem is giving you a mitzvah because somebody who needs it's going to find it, and you're going to get the credit for the person finding it. A very beautiful Rashi, long Rashi here, but sharing with you this topic. Let's move right along. Hey, we're talking about the guy who doesn't know if he did a severe sin or not. Not just that he did it by mistake, but he doesn't. It was by mistake, but he's still not sure even if he did the sin. Hey, I'll tell him you have to bring a ram, a complete ram, again unblemished ram. Don't bring a beat up gift. Bring a complete one. Minat from the flock. The same money value, the 2 silver sloim that we said before, has to, remember that how we're defining it, that has to be a certain price range. You bring it to the kohen, the kohen will ask forgiveness for you on your mistake. You're not sure if you did it or not. this sacrifice will carry the sin for you and you're good. However, if you do find out later on that you sinned, you got to go bring, because this sacrifice is only for someone who doesn't know that they sinned. What if he does know that he sinned? Then you got to bring the second sacrifice. Once you find out that, yes, it was a real sin that you did by mistake, then you have to bring an intentional, a sacrifice that you know for sure that you sinned. Asham, who? Asham la Hashem. So it was a sin that was done, and it was done. You find out later on that you really did the sin, and therefore the person now has to bring that gift to Hashem. Now he's including an interesting case, that there's another case which you have to bring this animal. I don't know. I don't remember the details. I'm going to go off a little bit guessing here. The case, if I remember a little bit, the case basically. We also learned that there's a maidservant does also become and can marry a certain person, could work as be sold as a maidservant, but also become somewhat of a wife to the owner or the son of the owner. Remember, we learned that a while ago that they married. So he says there's another case where a person, I think he's saying, cheated. He went and he violated or had a relations with this woman that wasn't a regular married woman to another guy, but was married in this way. It was a maidservant kind of marriage. So I believe it's not as a grievous crime as violating adultery to a fully regular married woman. But in this case, it's an interesting case. This sacrifice would be the correct sacrifice for this kind of violation that was done. Okay, so that's a little bit about it, about this case. Okay, verse 20. I think this is the last carbon we're learning here. Let's see. Hashem spoke to Moshe saying, another case, which also could be more modern, common cases today, where somebody lies financially. And he denied his friend, which means bipikadon. Guy gave somebody a guarantee. So he needed money, and I think Rashi is going to say he didn't want anyone to know that he needed money, because if he needed money and didn't mind for the public to know about it, he'll go to the bank or he'll draw up a contract and there'll be witnesses. There's not going to be any hanky-panky, any bad stuff going on. But here, he didn't want people to know. So he wants to borrow money, but the guy won't lend him money without any guarantee. So he gives them a guarantee, and he gives them, person gives them their wedding ring, they give them, something expensive that they have, family heirloom. You give them bekad. Or with money. Guy just lent. So either either the guy was given to hold a guarantee, or a guy was given money, certain money, and then he turned around and he lied. He says it's not true, and nobody knows about it because there's no contract drawn up. They don't want people to know about it. The only one who knows about it is Hashem. And he says, no, you never gave me anything as a guarantee. I know what you're talking about. And he wants to keep the item that was given as a guarantee. Or he wants to keep the money. The guy who got money wants to keep the money. Or somebody went and he stole. Or he withheld funds, another case. You keep on hearing this about a certain famous politician who they keep on saying about him that people did work for the guy and then the guy didn't pay them, right? I just heard this the other day. That this guy, about a former president, that people would do work for him and then he wouldn't pay them. So here's a case. A guy works for another person and the guy's saying, I don't owe you any money. The guy did his time. He put in his time and did work for him. So again, denial happened in these cases. Either of these cases, let's go over it again. Either the guy was given an item as a guarantee, or an item was given money. Someone was given money, or somebody stole, or somebody withheld money to a worker, a person. You also owe the guy money, right? You withheld wages. You hired a guy. The guy worked for you, whatever. You didn't pay him. It could be $10, whatever it is. You withheld the money from the person. And then what happens is, verse 22, or another case, you found the lost item and you want to keep it. And the guy says, where do you have it? And you say, no, I swear I don't have your item. And he swears false. I swear I don't have. On all the above possible cases, right? The guy says, I swore I worked for you. I worked for you for a week and you never paid me. He says, I swear I worked for you for a week and you never paid me. And the guy says, and he says, swear you didn't work for me. So he's lying. So if anyone does to sin, and he doesn't want to pay back the item he found, then he says, listen, I was a bad person. My life I stole, right? This Jew maybe gets thrown in jail or whatever. He starts learning Torah. He starts learning Chassidus, Tanya, and Chumash. And he says, you know what? I want to become a good Jew. What do I need to do? How do I make up for the stealing that I've done? So first of all, return what you stole. You have to pay everybody back. Or that you withheld money from a worker, pay him back. Or the guarantee item that you lied about, give that back. Oh yes, the lost item that you lied about, pay back. And regret and acknowledge that you sinned. Okay? He regrets, he's turning the corner, he's becoming a good person again. Oh, or anything he swore falsely about, and he pays it back. He's going to pay back the principal of what he stole. And guess what? You're also going to pay back a fifth, just like by the temple. You pay back for what you misappropriated from the holiness. Same thing as with this person. You now owe the guy a fifth. Yosef, Allah, you add a fifth to it. Lasher huloi, to the person that you lied to. Yitnana, but yamashmasi, you give it back to him on the day that on the day you admit your guilt. You pay him back. Now he says, what happens if the guy says, oh, I lied? In other words, I really don't owe you anything else. Now he's a double liar. Once he admits he owes it, now he owes. Let's say he borrowed from someone $100. He says, I swear I don't owe you the $100. Now you owe $120, right? Because you owe a fifth. Then he says, you know what? I'm changing my mind. I don't really owe you. Now you're a double liar because you're not just a liar on the $100. You're now a liar on the $20 because you owe the guy $20. So now you got to pay a fifth of the 20, right? Of $20 because you lied about that. So now you owe me even more. And every time you lie again and again, you keep on having to pay more because you owe on the new money that you owe. Verse 25, so not just you have to pay back the guy, the principal plus a fifth. You also bring a sacrifice of Hashem Tashem. Al Tamim. What is the sacrifice? A complete ram from the flock with the two silver sloim that we mentioned earlier. It has to have a certain value. That value mentioned earlier. And the Kohen will get forgiveness for you. You'll be forgiven for all the stealing that you've done. You'll be forgiven on one of the sins. So it's interesting. The stealing sin, a number of sins we mentioned today, for the Karban Asham, the ram guilt offering is actually intentional. It wasn't forgiveness for it's a little bit less of a heinous crime, but the difference is that it was intentional. And once you pay back first, you can't just bring out a sacrifice and be forgiven. Once you pay back those people that you stole from, and then you bring a gift to Hashem, Hashem will accept your forgiveness and the person will be forgiven. And that is the end of this week's Parsha. Very interesting Chumash that we had, learned all about